Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another Question the Narrative video, and today's topic is forced schooling. One of my goals of this channel is to just encourage people to research things independently that they're interested in and to not always listen to those quote authority figures that are thrust in our face through the news media, through the education system, and just through society at large. One of the reasons that we as a populace are so complacent when it comes to doing as we're told is because we have been conditioned this way from the time that we are old enough to start school. And if you notice, they are trying to make the compulsory school age younger and younger and younger. So if you're wondering about my title, Forced Schooling, let's not forget that there are compulsory school laws. It's not something that people have an option to do. They must send their children to school between certain ages. I think right now, at least in Pennsylvania, the compulsory school age starts at age 6. It used to be 8 and now it's 6. And you might be thinking, well, Shelley, children need to be educated, right? And I would completely agree with you. But unfortunately, the problem is that education has never been the ultimate goal of compulsory schooling, specifically government schools. One thing that I don't often mention on my channel is that I used to have it was mainly a homeschool blog, but I did speak, or I wrote a lot about education on that blog, and I even have an entire section on compulsory schooling. So rather than improvising what I'm going to say to you today about what the narrative is about compulsory schooling and what the truth is about it, I'm just going to share with you a few articles that I wrote about it. I always share articles here, so I thought to myself, okay, well, this time I'm actually going to share articles that I wrote. So these are really important because so many parents, they just send their children to school by default. They don't even think twice about it. They just think that it's the normal thing to do. But the fact is that a lot of people will call homeschooling an experiment, but it's not homeschooling that is the experiment. School is the experiment. And compulsory schooling has only been part of society for a very small percentage of time. But since that's all that we know, since it's been going on for generations now, we don't look at it as any other way as the thing that you are supposed to do when your children reach a certain age. But let's read a little bit more about what this is actually all about. So this is called, Here's the Real Reason Why Public Education Will Never Get Better. Have you ever had an issue you were really passionate about but felt like you had to tiptoe around so as not to upset a bunch of people? You know that right now I have a lot of those topics, don't I? Anyway, for me, that issue is public education. To be sure, I've certainly tackled the issue more than a few times here on my blog, but I've always held back just a bit because I didn't want to make anyone mad. Although a few people always seem to get irritated anyway. I just have to interject here. So you see, this has been going on with me for a very long time. I say what I'm thinking, and that's just who I am. Well, I've decided that I'm not going to hold back any longer. Several times a year, several times a month, perhaps, I'll come across an article somewhere, or a letter to the editor, or even enter into a conversation about what needs to be done to fix our nation's schools. The problem is that most people don't realize the real root of this problem, and that is, our schools are never going to be fixed because they're already doing what they were intended to from the beginning. And therein lies the problem. You see, most people don't realize that the public education system was never designed to educate in the first place. It was set in place as a means to train obedient citizens. Think of it as a giant social engineering experiment and future factory workers. Consider this quote by John D. Rockefeller, philanthropist and one of the masterminds behind compulsory schooling, and many other things I have to add in here. I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers. Or this quote by John T. Gates, advisor to John Rockefeller and founder of Rockefeller Foundation, Rockefeller University General Education Board. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or of science. We are not to raise up among them authors, orators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, and musicians. Nor will we cherish even the humbler ambition to raise up from among them lawyers, doctors, preachers, statesmen, of whom we now have ample supply. Truth be told, I could go on and on with quotes like these, but here's the gist of it. Schooling and education are two different things. Education is about exploration and learning how to think. Schooling, which is what our public, aka government schools, are a part of, is about training and teaching children what to think. Someone who is being educated will be told, do some research on this topic, study the evidence, weigh both sides, and make an informed conclusion. Someone who is being schooled is told, this is how it is because scientists, historians, and other people who are smarter than you have already figured it out. There's no need to look into it further. Now, before I feel the wrath of teachers everywhere, let me just say that I am not suggesting for 1 minute that teachers are knowingly a part of this. I have nothing but respect for the teachers who are out there in the trenches every day. I am fully aware that in essence, they are doing what they were trained to do, that many of them genuinely love their students, and that even if they sense that something is wrong with all this, their hands are tied. I'm going to interject here that I also know that there are some not so good teachers who have an agenda that has nothing to do with education also, and they're proud of that. Anyway, I get it. So this isn't directed at educators at all. I'm just trying to open your eyes. Make no mistake about it, public school students are being indoctrinated every single day. You may assume a child's lessons and assignments are about academics, and they are on the surface, but that isn't all. One of the goals of the public education system is to shape a child's morals and character, and those views are built into every worksheet, every quiz, every textbook, and you can bet it's a major part of Common Core. Warning, graphic example. Last week, I wrote this several years ago, I think like 2017 or 18, so I'll say years ago, a friend from my church called the superintendent of her grandson's school district because he came home with a psychology quiz which included a question about whether or not beverages will affect the taste of semen. When she confronted the superintendent, he actually had the nerve to say that that textbook was approved by the school board, and he didn't have time to read every page of every textbook. It's about politics. It's about political correctness. It's about teaching children to submit to authority in all circumstances. In the past, I've written about the possibility that compulsory schooling has contributed to the breakdown of the family, and I still feel firmly that this is the case. I find it ironic that one of the reasons compulsory schooling was instituted was because of child labor laws. So they took children out of factories and put them in a different kind of factory. Only now they're forced to do it by law, and they don't get paid for it. Huh? Then, after children are in this factory school setting all day, very possibly followed by voluntary after-school programs, they are expected to come home and complete 2 hours of homework and often help with household chores. And we wonder why the family unit is weak? Suffice it to say, all of these things are done by government-run schools on purpose. Their main goals are to train a populace that is unable to think on its own, is easily influenced, is willing to work for very little, embraces a moral code that makes it easiest for them to control, and has no real ties to their families. Looking around me today, I think our schools are without a doubt doing what they were intended to do. Worrying about how to save them won't get us anywhere because let's face it, schools aren't broken. We are, and it's because of them. And then I just finished up with a quote by John Taylor Gatto. School is a 12-year jail sentence where bad habits are the only curriculum truly learned. I teach school and win awards doing it. I should know. So right here, and I'll link this video at the end of the video that I'm doing right now, but this video right here, I went even deeper into the history of public education and what it was all about and how it was formed and what the purposes were and what life was like before compulsory schooling. I often say in my videos that I think that they make school boring on purpose because they want to discourage people from actually being curious enough to look into things on their own. That's one of the reasons that I absolutely hated history when I was in school, because they taught it in such a boring way that I couldn't have cared less about it. Now, though, as an adult and as a homeschool mom, I absolutely love history because I learn it in a way that fits me and in a way that really brings it to life for both me and my children. I've recently been getting a lot of comments admonishing me for referring to books in my videos. And I'm starting to realize that it is very likely because people are so used to other people doing their research for them that they think that it's more credible to just put on some YouTube video instead of actually digging into these books themselves. And I think it's sad because books can open up an entire world for you and can bring meaning to things that you never even knew that you were misunderstanding. So next, let's take a look at the relationship between public education and ADHD. And I think that you might be very interested in what my conclusion is, and you might feel something very similar to this as well. So this one, public education and ADHD, a question of what if? Ever since I took off my kid gloves last week and finally addressed the truth about public education, I have been pondering the question behind why schools do things the way they do. Take special education, for example, specifically the education establishment's approach to children with ADHD. As a mom to a child who was diagnosed with ADHD when he was in school, I have had first-hand experience with this, but for the sake of time, I won't be getting into our specific story today. Right now, I'm more concerned with the general treatment of these children in the school setting. In this setting, children with this condition are often recommended to be medicated, slapped with the label of special education, and given an IEP. There are a couple reasons behind this. Freeing the teacher from disruptions and providing the student with an, and this is an air quote, individualized learning environment. Makes sense, right? Knowing what I know about the history of compulsory schooling, however, I can't help but ponder what else may be behind this approach, because although it may appear to be very innocent and proactive, the results are anything but. Why? Because wearing the label of special ed comes with a stigma that is so prevalent that even the youngest children in an elementary school will immediately pick up on it. These kids are different. They don't do things the way everyone else does. There must be something wrong with them. As a child in the Gifted and Honors program, I remember all too well the snide remarks my teachers would make about the kids in those classes. They were slow learners. They didn't listen. You don't want to end up in those classes. And those remarks, no matter how subtle, stuck with me. I remember the days when I would have to sit across from the LD, which means learning disabilities, kids at lunch. Days which I dreaded because I didn't want to be near them. What if they had germs? What if they breathed on my food? I can't count the number of times I went home with an empty stomach because I threw out my lunch in case one of those kids breathed on it. As an adult, I am ashamed I ever felt this way, but this is the way I was conditioned. Yes, conditioned in my school. And now that I've brought up conditioning, the sole purpose of the compulsory school system, I can finally get to the point of this post. What if? What if there's more to this story? For those of you who aren't familiar with the history of compulsory schooling, I highly recommend you watch this video. And again, that's just the video that I'm going to link to the end of the video that I'm doing right now before you go any further, because this information will be crucial in helping you understand the enormity of what I'm proposing. For those of you who know exactly what I'm talking about, let's ponder a few things. What if the problem is about more than classroom interruptions? As you should be well aware of by now, compulsory schooling is not about educating, but is about training obedient citizens and workers. That's why the public education system cares more about teaching children to parrot back information, rather than desiring for them to truly learn anything. For the average student, learning to play the school game will come sooner or later. This isn't quite so easy for a child with ADHD. Children with ADHD are impulsive. They will speak up when things don't make sense, and you can bet they will question why they have to do certain things. This isn't good in a setting that is meant to train children to blindly submit to authority. What if one of the reasons these children are taken out of the classroom is so that they will not set an example of thinking for themselves to their peers? What if the quote bad influence these children are rumored to have on their classmates is only bad for compulsory schooling, but is ultimately good for the critical thinking skills of their classmates? That's something to think about, isn't it? What if their individualized work isn't all it's cracked up to be? I know I said I wasn't going to get into our personal story of ADHD today, but one thing I will address is the individualized work my son was bringing home when he was in school. You see, it wasn't really individualized learning at all. It was simply the same old worksheets given in every classroom, except these worksheets were 2 grade levels lower than the one he was in. If there's one thing I know about kids with ADHD, it's that they don't do well with worksheets. They need hands-on, engaging activities, and you can bet your life that educational bureaucrats are well aware of this. So the question is, why are these children being presented with a dumbed-down version of the run-of-the-mill classroom assignments that all students get? I think the phrase dumbed down just may hold the answer to that. What if these kids are presented with lower grade level assignments to make them feel stupid, to put them in their place, so to speak, so that they become too self-conscious to question the status quo? That's exactly what it did to my son. He is now a homeschooled 12th grader. Now, this is years later. He's actually 24 years old now. And to this day, he calls himself stupid. Angry does not even begin to describe how that makes me feel. What if the special education stigma happened on purpose? As a writer, there's one thing I'm very, very sure of. Words mean things. What if the instincts we've developed towards those children with learning differences happened on purpose? What if the spin that is placed on certain words and phrases, such as special education, learning disabilities, IEP, learning support, learning disabilities, ADHD, autistic, was deliberately put in place to devalue anything these kids have to say? Keep in mind that these are the same children who are most likely to speak up and question authority. What if the best way to silence those who may inspire others to open their eyes is to take away their credibility and portray them as less than? This certainly isn't unheard of. I see it happening in the adult world every day. People who question things that most people accept because some authority figure told them so are often described as paranoid, back in the Stone Age, conspiracy theorists, stupid, uninformed, lunatics, and so on and so on. Even as adults, we continue to shun those who think differently than we do, not because we've done any research, but because we assume we know more than they do. We're programmed to react this way, and it has to change. We have to change. The million-dollar question is, what will it take? So with that being said, and just with touching on the purpose of what forced schooling was really all about, one of the really negative repercussions, and I'm wondering if it was one of the purposes, was that it removed children from their families. And in that scenario, it completely changed the dynamics of family life for the worst. People today, unfortunately, have no idea what it is to be parents because their children are away from them for 6 to 8 hours a day, 36 weeks out of the year. And I'll get into that, actually, instead of just talking about it here. Last one, I promise. Is compulsory schooling to blame for the breakdown of the family? Another narrative we really need to think about. A few weeks ago, I addressed some issues I have with compulsory attendance laws, namely the governmental role in education and truancy laws. While wrapping my brain around the entire matter, I also delved into what life might be like if there were no such thing as compulsory schooling. Now, I will link the articles that I read today. I'll leave a link in the description box for them if you wanted to just kind of cruise around my blog, which again, I don't add anything to anymore, but there's a lot of information on here. Anyway, I never know what I'm getting myself into when diving into sensitive discussions like that. But one of my passions as a writer is to engage and inform people about serious problems within the public education system so that they are no longer content simply accepting the status quo. Hence this new post today. One thing that surprised me in the comments of the aforementioned posts is the fervor people have for this very subject, no matter what their stance may be. Some people completely agreed with everything I wrote, while others were very concerned about what would happen to children with less than involved parents if compulsory schooling were ever to disappear. Although this is very unlikely because the powers that be enjoy governmental control too much for that to happen. Unfortunately, I don't have any answers for that. But these concerns have brought to light something that I'm astonished so many people seem to have missed. The onset of compulsory schooling was the catalyst for the downfall of the family. Before compulsory school laws were put into place, the family was central to everything. Children learned by helping their parents in the day-to-day things that their families depended upon. Their parents were not just mom and dad, they were mentors. They were involved. Children knew how important their familial role was, and they felt valued because of it. Post-compulsory schooling, that all changed. In fact, that may well be how we got into this sorry mess we're in today. It's completely ironic to me that people are concerned about abolishing mandatory public education because of bad parenting, and rightly so, when a major factor in the epidemic of bad parenting is, you guessed it, public education. Confused? Let's take a look at the one major factor that has caused this inevitable breakdown of the family. Compulsory education replaced the parent's role as primary caregiver and teacher. Let's be honest here. How can people learn to be decent parents when their children are taken from them 6 hours a day minimum, 36 weeks a year? Parents today no longer consider themselves solely responsible for their children. How many times have you heard someone say, I can't wait for school to start. Let their teacher deal with them. My kids are driving me crazy. I hate summer vacation. How many times have you seen parents cheer on the first day of school? I'm not judging anyone here because I've done it. Thankfully, though, I've realized that the reason people can't handle their children anymore is because they aren't with them enough. They defer to the teacher's advice on just about everything because their teachers spend more time with their kids than they do. This was never a problem before compulsory school laws were legislated. People knew how to be parents. Once the responsibility of raising our children was taken away, it opened the doors to things almost unheard of and certainly not considered the norm before school existed. A skyrocketing divorce rate, latchkey kids, the devaluing of the role of the housewife and stay-at-home mother, a never-ending journey for material wealth, the notion that you can have it all, although it's usually the children who suffer the most from this falsehood, abortion, someone other than parents making medical decisions for their children, for example, schools handing out birth control, and unfortunately nowadays we have even worse things than that happening in schools when it comes to medical issues. ADHD. As a parent of a child with ADHD, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I am suggesting that school does not provide the proper outlet for it, thus the large number of medicated children, and the quality over quantity lie. The quality over quantity lie is another post that I wrote, and it's just basically that we're constantly told that it doesn't matter how much time we spend with our children, but just the quality of that time. And I'm going to tell you that no, that's actually backwards. The amount of time that you spend with your children does matter. I can look back on all the time I spent with my dad, and I don't care that we were sitting at home most of those days. I cared that he was there with me because my mom worked second shift. She wasn't home. My dad was the one that was home with me after school. We didn't do anything spectacular, but I certainly am so thankful to have had that time with him every single day. I would have much rather had that than spending 1 or 2 days a week with him doing something, quote, fun. No, quantity really does matter. Anyway, the list goes on and on. So before you decide that school may be the best thing for some children, I want you to think about this one thing. Ultimately, school is what got them into this predicament to begin with. And, unfortunately, like I said at the beginning of this post, I don't have an answer for that. But the irony of people looking for answers from the very entity that created the problem to begin with, I mean, it's classic Hegelian dialectic. And I think that people need to be aware of it. Anyway, that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work and would like to support my page or my channel, I will leave a link in the description box to my YouTube membership, or you can just click on it right on my channel page. And I hope you have a great day.